Now I thought we'd look at a different style of flower arrangement today, still using a pumpkin because it's the autumn season and it's a very seasonal design. But we're going to look at using dried flowers instead of fresh flowers. Now I've got myself a pumpkin, and what we're going to do with that in just a second is spray paint it to create a sort of copper or rose gold effect to the pumpkin itself. Now this one is called a white pumpkin. It does look a bit yellowy cream, but if you're ordering pumpkins, this is what would be referred to as a white pumpkin. Now I've got some gypsophilia, wonderful apricot sort of colour shade of colour, and this has been dyed through absorption. So it's been put in a dyed solution and it absorbs up through the stem and turns into this wonderful colour. What you need to be aware of when working with material that's been dyed from the stem, that it can leak out and cause quite a lot of damage. So you need to be quite careful with it when you're working, and don't ever use materials like this where they're going to sit on a white tablecloth, or they're going to be used with maybe a wedding dress for a bride, because the dye can leak off and cause quite serious damage. So that's the gypsophilia. If you're loving the dried trend at the moment for flowers, then you're going to really love these spathes. This originally would have been a great big huge palm, and they've cut it down, dried the very base section and remove the tall fronds from off the side. So we call these palm spears. Not quite sure yet whether I'm also going to spray paint those. This one is a dried amaranthus, and this one has just been spray dyed or possibly dip dyed, which is a quicker way of preserving and drying the materials and dyeing them these different colours. Then we've got some of the ruscus. This is bleached ruscus. Can be a little bit controversial at the moment because the bleaching process isn't particularly good for the environment, but it's real a material that's really quite popular at the moment. So that's the bleached ruscus. Now here in the UK we get lots of bracken and ferns growing in the woodland area, and this was one I would have picked and dried from last year, and it gives wonderful texture, beautiful colour. I'm probably going to leave it as it is, but again might give it a little shimmer of some copper spray. And I've also got, I don't know whether I'm going to use this yet, this is again a dried hydrangea. This is a fantastic time of the year, so we're mid-October here in the UK. If you've got hydrangeas in the garden, now is the time to cut them before the weather turns too damp. Cut them, bring them inside, keep them somewhere where there's lots of air circulation, and they will dry beautifully without you worrying too much about any particular processing to the plant material itself. It'll dry in the air in the house. And then to cover any gaps, I have this Tillandsia or Spanish moss. This is a gorgeous material, grey in its tone. This is a natural moss, and it grows hanging from trees. It's what we call an epiphyte. It grows and lives off other plants, and then it's harvested and packed up for us florists to use. If you're a keen grower of air plants, then this is something that you might be quite familiar with. If you're lucky enough to live in an area, I know Florida and that part of the world has this growing naturally on the trees. So that's my basic material. We might add to it as we go along. Now, this is my floral foam. It's different to the foam that we've used before. If I just move that pumpkin out of the way. This is dry foam. Floral sec it's called in a lot of places, and you'll see that it's grey in colour, doesn't absorb any water at all, and I've kept myself quite a small bit of foam because I don't want to overfill and clutter it up by having to use lots of materials to fill and cover my floral foam. And another new material that we maybe not have talked about in videos before, this is oasis tape, floral tape, pot tape. It's got lots of different names, but it's a clear one, almost like sellotape. And if you haven't got pot tape at home, sellotape is a really good substitute. This is a much stronger version, and it's obviously see-through. So if we're using clear containers, glassware, then this is a better option to use. And because my materials are all quite natural colours, I was a bit worried that by the time I'd done my arrangement, you would see this very solid green line there across the middle with the floral tape that I normally use for fresh arranging. So a nice clear one for today. It's good and strong, and that will secure my foam quite nicely onto my container. Now, in the last video, when we did the fresh pumpkin, we also looked at fresh pampas grass, and again, or it wasn't fresh pampas grass, it was dried pampas grass. So again, I've got this time a more natural colour pampas grass, and you see it just behind me here. And I've done the same method. I've broken it down into small sections, wired the bottom, so that I can have multi-headed pieces rather than one big tall stem like behind me. Okay, so I'm going to pop off. I'm going to spray my pumpkin using these two different colours. This is rose gold, and this one I believe is champagne. I'm going to give it a light zhoosh, a light dusting, and hopefully I'm going to have a nice pumpkin to work with in a couple of minutes. So see you back in just a while. Now, it's a typical autumn day today, so it's a bit chilly, there's a bit of a nip in the air, nice and sunny, but the pumpkin isn't drying as quickly as I would like it to. So I might end up with some rose gold coloured fingers by the time I finish. But you can see that I've used the two colours, so the rose gold was quite shiny, and I've just added the champagne on top because it's going to dull the colour down a little bit and stop it looking so bright and so brash. But it is still a bit damp in a few patches, but we'll carry on, see what happens. Might be a disaster, but here goes. Okay, so another product that I possibly have not talked about with you before is this floral fix. Now, this is from the brand Oasis, but there are other brands available to use. And it's almost like a sticky plasticine. It's quite a thick green tacky substance, and we use it to hold floral foam into containers along with a small plastic frog, which again we haven't looked at in videos before. And what I want to do with this pumpkin is, rather than cutting a hole in it and placing the floral foam inside, I'm going to make the arrangement in a separate container so that you can keep the dried flower material until next year and maybe reuse it again in a different container, or reuse a pumpkin for next year. So what I'm going to do is just sit it on top of the pumpkin. Now, normally we would use the green floral tape and we would come over the top and attach it to our container. That's going to make the design look really heavy, and you're going to have lots of tape to cover with your materials. So what I'm going to try to do, hopefully the pumpkin is dry enough, I'm going to use the floral fix almost like a glue or a putty to hold the base of my container onto the pumpkin. What you need to be careful of is not to touch the green sticky substance too much, because it will lose its adhesiveness. Is that such a word? Who knows? It's going to lose its stickiness. Now, what I'm looking to do is to see where the plastic container is touching the pumpkin. So we've got one section there. And for the moment, I've just stuck the Oasis tape. What's the best way? Let's do it that way. I've just stuck the Oasis tape onto the top of the pumpkin and make sure that's nice and firmly attached before removing the protective layer on the top. Now, hopefully, if the pumpkin is dry, that will secure quite nicely. You can see there that's lifting slightly. I'm sure for the purpose of the video we're going to be okay, and then that hopefully will sit quite nicely on the top. I'm going to add one more piece on the opposite side. Now, I'm anticipating that, you know, this is just a display piece that I'm making today. It's not going to be transported anywhere. It's not going in a vehicle, and no customers are carrying this to their car. It's just going to be used on my shop display. If that was going out in a vehicle and it was bouncing around on the road, then I would have to think of a better way of securing that. But for you at home who are doing some flower arranging just for yourselves, that's an adequate way of attaching your foam. And you could even get away without using that plastic container there as well. You could just use maybe even some kebab skewers into the pumpkin just to hold the floral foam there on top. But the plastic dish gives it a much more pleasing effect. Okay, so that's my pumpkin and my mechanics there on the top, nice and hopefully nice and secure. And I've added to my list of dried material this wonderful barley. Oh, it looks very much like wheat, but we've got the longer ears on it, and that can be placed in the design towards the end. And this one is going to be front facing today. So the design we did in the orange pumpkin was all around. This one is going to be more front facing and using all this beautiful textured material that has been dried. Now I'm going to start with the hydrangea, and this is going to come sort of towards the front as almost like a bit of a focal point towards the front. Now the design is not as traditional as the orange pumpkin, so I haven't got a look about making things equally balanced and equally dispersed throughout the design. Again, this one is going to be my focal point at the front, but it's slightly off centre, so that I'm not looking at this, you know, what I often refer to as a great big headlight there in the front. It's going to be slightly off there to one side. And I'm not going to be worrying about putting any flowers in the back. I'm just going to be using the moss and some of the bracken to cover my design. To cover the foam at the front. Now if I just turn this back around and you look on this bottom section here, you can really see that floral foam and that plastic container. So I need to work on covering that area there. Because all of this plastic container, the tape and the floral foam, it's all called, or all comes under the category of mechanics. And I don't mean the man that fixes your car. It's all the bits that we need to cover and hopefully hide when we've finished the design. Right, so I'm going to go with this beautiful bracken, and if you can't get bracken, some fern of any description that you might have growing in the garden, you could buy some asparagus from your local florist. Asparagus fern, that is, not the asparagus to eat. Now you could, if you haven't got dried material, you could buy some silk flowers as well, and you can purchase those at a good florist shop or a homeware shop. You've got plenty of materials this time of the year. Car boot sales, charity shops, they're all really good for storing different types of textured material that you can use. Now I'm going to go about height-wise about the same height as the pumpkin itself. So if you think about the size of that repeated on the top, that's how tall I'm going to go. It will allow my pumpkin to remain a nice feature and not hide it too much with the dried materials. Now what I'm doing at the moment is I'm working in groups. So rather than evenly distributing the material around, I've worked in two groups that are opposite one another at a bit of a jaunty angle. So we've got this front section here, which helps to drape down over the front, hide all the ugly mechanics there underneath. And then to give me some weight and some height at the back, I've brought some of the bracken all the way to the back. Now, in my head, I'm imagining that this design is going to go up against a wall. So I'm not going to waste too much of my decorative material at the back. But there's nothing stopping you creating this design as an all-round flower arrangement, just like that fresh pumpkin that I showed you in the previous video. Okay, so a little bit more of the bracken, I think round towards the front. Now, if you're lucky enough to be living anywhere near moorlands or some wooded areas, you'll find plenty of this bracken growing naturally in the UK. Otherwise, you can order it in from a florist shop and they would be able to get you something similar. Maybe not exactly the same, but something similar that you could use. Or just rummage around in your storage cupboards. If you've been doing flower arranging for a while, you've probably got a box of goodies in your garage or your attic, whatever you are. And if you're new to flower arranging, welcome to the channel. I hope you're enjoying. If you haven't met me before, my name is Sharon Dower and I do lots of YouTube videos with hints and tips of how to create some beautiful floral designs. We've been a bit quiet over the summer months because we've been busy here in the studio with weddings, but we're back now in full force to hopefully lead you up to Christmas. And again, if you're new, don't forget to subscribe to the channel because you'll get the opportunity to view some fabulous floral designs. And you can hit the bell to be notified if you want to be informed every time I post a new video. Right, so okay, you can see now this blocking or grouping that I'm making, and I've used the amaranthus here at the back grouped together. And what I'm trying to do in this type of design is put textures together that are very different from one another. So either a contrast in colour, or a contrast in texture, or a contrast in shape. And those are the elements and principles of design that you hear me talk about a lot when I'm creating floral designs. And you will find a video where I describe and explain the principles and elements of design in more detail. Now we have these fabulous palm spears or palm spathes, and it's a great contrast alongside the bracken. So we've got this very solid shape, and then we've got something that's more lace in its appearance. So they are completely different and they stand out really well alongside one another. Okay, so what I'm going to do with this one, I'm going to place it on the opposite side, and I'm going to group two of those together. Now I seem to have lost one because I definitely had 3 to start with, and now I've only got 2. It looks like it's probably fallen on the floor. So I've grouped 2 together. Now if you're used to working symmetrically and you're used to doing traditional British designs, then you would like to have the 2 palm spathes opposite one another. You would like to have them in identical positions on opposite sides. But in more contemporary sort of design, we tend to group them together, and working in pairs is perfectly acceptable. In traditional flower arranging, you will get told to work in 3s, 5s and 7s, which is perfectly correct, and it's very visually pleasing to the eye. But when working in contemporary designs, we use slightly different design rules and proportions, or quantities I should say, and we look at the Fibonacci sequence of numbers, and that includes the number 2. So it's perfectly acceptable to place things in pairs. Right, okay, let's just turn it back round for me to take a better look. Right, so now I'm going to go in. I found my 3rd palm spathe. Now what I don't want to do is go directly opposite these, because they almost look like wings, birds flapping up and down. So I'm going to bring it in more in this position up towards the top. And one thing you need to consider with the dried flowers, so if you're going to keep them from one year to the next, you need to keep them somewhere where it's dry and there's no moisture in the air at all, so no damp locations, and then this will last until next year. Obviously the pumpkin won't, but the dried flowers themselves can be brought out next year. You can create a different design with them completely. Right, okay, so I go back to explaining to you how I've tried to put textures that are very different alongside one another. So if we now think about this very small, soft, textured little flower that's the gypsophilia, I need to think about where am I going to put it within the design where it's not going to be completely lost. Now it's a different colour to the hydrangea, so they'd work well alongside one another. It's smaller, the texture is different and the colour is different. So what I'm going to do with this one is bring some towards the front, and it will help a little bit. Now the camera angle that you're looking at the design from might be different to my eye line, so you might be able to see more of that ugly plastic container underneath. But what I will do at the end is I'll use the moss draped down over the front of the container, and that will make sure that we've hidden any of those ugly mechanics there at the bottom. Okay, now this is going to be, it's not a very bold plant material, it's quite soft, almost translucent, so you might not pick this up quite as clearly on the camera as you will the other flowers, but it should contrast beautifully there against that lovely coloured palm spade. It's paler and it's a different shape completely. And then I'm going to do something very similar opposite, but at a different angle. So again, we don't create those very traditional placements with our flowers. So contemporary work tends to be flowers grouped together in this manner rather than equally spaced out. And there's lots of different ways of doing contemporary flower arranging. Don't feel that this is the only way you can arrange flowers. Right, okay, I think that's coming together really well so far. Now, the bleached ruscus is obviously a creamy white colour. It's quite a dominant colour. So what I'm going to do is, rather than add it in close to the same coloured flower material, I'm going to place it in a different position. Otherwise, it's just going to blend in with the spades. So I need to think about putting it in a different position. And I'm only going to use this in a small quantity. It's quite a strong, the paler colours can be quite dominant and quite eye-catching. So I'm going to place it in just a few positions. Let's just see if that will drape down over the front. Yes, it will. So that will help at the front there, cover a little bit of my foam. And I'm going to put another placement up at the back there to bring some of that texture and the colour through towards the top section. Now I've picked up a scissors. I've picked up 2 scissors to work with, and one of them's not as sharp as I like it to be, so I'm trying to avoid working with that one. And then I've just got these 2 small pieces left, so we might as well use them up. And I'm going to just bring it in towards the back. It'll help cover my plastic tape and bring some some actual weight, towards the back. So one thing I haven't mentioned, and again it's a principle and element of design, is actual weight. So if I keep adding all my dried flowers to the front, then the weight is going to be forward and it's going to make my design tip over. So I still need to consider bringing something through towards the back to weight this container down. Otherwise, when you're not expecting it, it's going to tip forward and completely fall off. Right, well I think that's really nice so far. That's really trendy at the moment, these dried flowers and the pumpkins in these metallic shades. We've still got some of the barley, and of course I've got the pampas grass, which I've cut down shorter as well, and this is going to give me lots of texture and a nice soft look to the arrangement. Right, so let's see how this is going to work. Now I've wired the pampas grass together, and you'll see the method for doing that in the video with the fresh flower pumpkin. And in the same manner, I'm just going to group these together so they make a nice statement. And I've put them very close to the palm spades because, again, the contrasts work really well together. And it gives a nice soft, light feel to the arrangement. What do we think so far? Nice? Liking it? Not liking it? Prefer the traditional pumpkin? Let us know in the comment box below what you prefer. Now the dried flowers, if you're on any type of social media, you will know that the dried flowers are really very much in vogue at the moment. Vases like the pampas grass just behind me in the home are so fashionable. And this is probably the best time of the year to buy the pampas grass, in the autumn. It's when it's best in season. And again, what I'm doing with the barley, I told you the pampas grass gets everywhere. So what I've done with the barley, I'm just cutting it into smaller sections and placing them in, again, in groups. Gives you far more impact and that more sort of contemporary style that we're looking for. Now I'm going to go for some at the back here. Now if you wanted to, you could have spray painted, or I could have spray painted. You can't do it because you're watching. If I wanted to, I could have added some spray paint onto the plant material here, but I quite like all those natural shades and those biscuity colours, that really natural colour palette that's very fashionable at the moment. Now hopefully that's gonna, you can see, now that's, if you can see, that's because I've added the tape before the pumpkin, the spray paint rather, has dried completely, and you can see the weight is slightly pulling to one side. So that's a good indication that I need to bring some weight towards the back of the arrangement, otherwise it's going to completely fall off. So with the floristry wire that we looked at before, I'm going to cut one of the wires in half, and I'm going to bend that to create what we call a hairpin. So it's a hairpin wire, it's just looped back in itself, and it will give me an anchor point to be able to insert the moss and secure the moss into the floral foam. Now I'm going to try and get it to drape down a little bit, so we're covering some of the plastic container there at the back. Now this is a Spanish moss, this one's called Tillandsia, but if you can't get this type, this is something you'd have to buy at a florist shop or from a specialist supplies. If you can't get this, having said that, depending on what part of the world you're living in, you could have this growing in your own vicinity around your home. But here in the UK, we have to get it in from a specialist supplier. But if you can't get this, you can pick up some ordinary sort of British moss that you would get growing in your garden. If you've got an area that's a bit boggy or is in the shade, just rake up a bit of moss from your own garden. And I'm just using little bits of the moss bunched together, and then I can use that pin, that metal pin, just to drape it together. Now if you've got more dried material, there's nothing wrong with you adding it there into the back. I just wanted to show you that if you don't have a huge amount of dried material, there's a fairly easy way of covering your mechanics. And covering that floral foam is what professional florists do. You know, if you're working from the home and you're just enjoying flower arranging at home, it's not as important to cover that foam. As long as you're enjoying and you're learning something new and you're experimenting, then don't worry too much about it. So pumpkins at the moment should be quite easily available at a good greengrocer or your local supermarket. Florist shops will probably have them as well. And they come in, you know, a whole host of sizes. And if you want to do something that's larger than this one, just scale up your design in the same proportions that I worked on before. So you're almost doubling the height of your pumpkin with the flower arrangement on top. So you're almost doing the same size or half again on top of your pumpkin. And what do we think? How do we think that's turned out? Is it something that you would have a little go at home? Do you feel it's a bit too advanced for you? A little bit more of the moss there at the back, and I think that's a really lovely design. So a different way of looking at a pumpkin, something you could keep from one year to the next. I hope you've enjoyed. I hope you're glad to see me back, because I'm certainly glad to be back doing some tutorials and a variety of flower arranging videos. So send me a picture if you've made, or put a picture in the comment box below. If you've got any questions again, ask them in the box below. And it's great to be back. See you with the next video very soon. Bye for now.